Hi, welcome everyone. I'm Carol from marketing here at Sunset Learning Institute. Welcome again. I'm here with David Cannon today. He is IT service management. He has a career that spans more than 30 years. He has been a practitioner, consultant, and business executive, all using and contributing to ITIL best management practice. He has 4 ITL books ranging from service operation to digital and IT strategies. And also he has led practice in Hewlett Packard, BMC Software, and Forest Research, an amazing curriculum. And today he's the head of the Americas region for People Search, where he champions use of best practice to meet the challenges of digital disruption and transformation. David, thank you so much for being with us today.
Great. Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. I see a couple of people still joining, but we're going to get started. This is being recorded, so you can always go back and get the bits that you missed. Let me share my screen and we will get started right now. Okay. So what we're going to be discussing today is how we leverage ITIL so that we get more out of our cloud services, both from a performance point of view as well as a cost management point of view. ITIL actually has a lot to say about the subject. Not all of it is in one place. Some of the practices that are in ITIL can be applied to cloud, but they're not necessarily designed around specifically cloud services. And so what I thought I'd do today is really talk about the issues that are facing organizations as they use cloud, as well as talking about the solutions to those issues and how ITIL can help. So let's take a quick look at the agenda. So the first thing I thought I would ask is, how well is cloud working for organizations? Because if everything is perfect, it's working well, we probably don't need to have this webinar. Clearly, we are having the webinar. So where are the issues, if there are issues? The second thing I want to look at is what makes cloud successful. For organizations that are using cloud successfully, what is it that they're doing, and how are they doing it? Then we're going to look at how ITIL helps. So if we understand what makes cloud successful, does ITIL contain any information, any guidelines that will help us achieve those things that will make our cloud use and acquisition successful? And then we're going to end with a special offer, very kindly offered by Sunset Learning. So do stay tuned for details about that. So how is cloud working? It's a bit of a reality check, because we've often heard the hype of cloud, that it's going to save us money, it's going to make things quicker, it's going to make things easier. But what is the reality? How are organizations actually using cloud today? And we did some research. This comes from all over the place. I've listed the sources that I got. There are a lot more sources about, but they say more or less the same thing. When it comes to cost, remember that one of the big promises of cloud is that we're going to be able to reduce the cost of computing within our organization. But what we found is that only 34% of organizations, so a third of organizations, are actually achieving the anticipated cost savings. What we're finding is that most organizations, a huge majority of organizations, 2/3 of organizations, in fact, are not achieving what they thought they could achieve by moving to cloud. Did they achieve some cost savings? Some of them did. Others found their cost savings going through the roof. Why was that? So we're going to explore why that is in a moment. The other thing that cloud promises us is that it will increase our speed to market. In other words, we will be able to develop products quicker. we'll be able to position them in the market quicker, and we'll be able to deliver them a lot quicker than before. We'll be able to increase our speed at being able to answer customer queries, complaints, and so on. But again, what we found is that 28% of organizations, less than a third of organizations, have actually achieved the speed to market benefits that they anticipated. Now, again, it's not to say that they did not achieve any benefits, but they did not achieve the speed to market benefits that they expected. The next thing we looked at is service levels. Again, many organizations say cloud is faster, it's easier to access, it is able to give us a lot more quality of service. And what we found, in fact, was, again, only a third of organizations were able to achieve these increases in the level of service. Same for business value. Well, we're going to be able to increase the value of our business. We're going to be able to move to a new business model, and that new business model is going to help us drive new sources of revenue in new ways. And in fact, only 35% of organizations were actually able to achieve the anticipated level of return on this. These are pretty negative figures. I read a piece of research a couple of weeks ago. I didn't save it, otherwise I would have included it in here. But it was one organization that had done some research into how cloud is being used in organizations. And what they found was that 65% of organizations had placed all new cloud initiatives on hold, that they were not going to move ahead with cloud until they had fixed the problems with their existing cloud solutions. This particular company called it the cloud moratorium. So what we're seeing, whether the figures are 100% accurate or not, what we're seeing is a general experience across the industry that we're not getting what we expect from cloud. Are we getting some good value? Yes. Are we able to achieve cost savings, speed to market, increasing service levels, and improved business value? Yes, we are. And there are organizations that are doing very well in these. The question is, what are those organizations doing? And how are they getting those kind of returns? So that's what I wanted to explore on this presentation. But before I get there, let's have a look at what the issues are. So a number of issues that prevent people from achieving their objectives. The first one and the main one is the security issue. The fact that we have to think differently about how we secure the services that we use in the cloud. It's one thing to have a bunch of devices and applications sitting in your own data center. You have a lot of control over those. But when you move into the cloud, you don't own that infrastructure, and you don't own the data center. In some cases, you don't even own the application. So how is it that we can secure those assets? Well, clearly, you're not going to go about it in the same way as you secure the assets that are in your data center. So that takes a bit of change in how we view security. It takes a bit of change in the kind of trust policies that we have. So we've heard about approaches like zero trust. Zero trust becomes a very important kind of approach to use within the cloud. Zero trust means, there are various approaches to security, and one says trust but verify, but zero trust says don't trust anything until you have verified it, and only then do you allow it to proceed under very clear and controlled situations. And that's the kind of approach that we're having to move to within the cloud. So first verify, make sure that you know what you're doing, make sure that you know who has access, what they're doing with that service, and then provide the right level of access and the right level of control for what you're trying to do. So there's a saying that very often is used by cloud service providers. They will tell you that the cloud is very secure, and they're right. When you look at their infrastructure controls, the way in which they control access, for example, to their data centers, it is very stringent. It is very rigorous. The way in which they manage the services they provide is very secure. It's very stringent. However, the way in which those services are consumed, the cloud service provider doesn't really have any control over that. So they will talk about security of the cloud versus security in the cloud. Security of the cloud means that their services, their infrastructure is very secure. However, security in the cloud is something that they expect their consumers to provide. For example, what is your security policy? How do you automate that policy? What kind of access control do you have in place? Can anybody just use a company credit card to buy the services, or do they have to go through some more rigorous process to make sure that they have the right to use those services, etc.? So it works very differently. And you'll find that as we go through all of these, you'll find that the answer is always, this works differently in the cloud than it does when something is in your data center. One of the reasons why so many organizations are struggling with the cloud is because they try to manage cloud services in the same way as they manage those on-premise devices, applications, etc. Cloud is very different. And that's also true of the next biggest problem, managing cloud spend. So what we found is that organizations find it very difficult to understand, first of all, their bill. Cloud bills can be very difficult to read and understand. And so there have been a number of practices that have been developed around this. One of them, of course, is FinOps. FinOps has evolved around the problem of we don't understand how to track costs in cloud. So FinOps as an approach try to solve that problem, and they have a lot of tools and techniques that can be used specifically to analyze and track costs in cloud. But that's not enough, because if you want to know how people are going to spend in cloud, remember, you only pay for what you use. So if you want to forecast cloud spend, you also have to be able to forecast utilization, which means you have to understand how users are going to use the cloud if you want to be able to forecast the spend in cloud. Lack of expertise. This is an interesting one. And that's changing. One of the biggest or the largest amount of training budget that is being spent today is on cloud architecture or cloud technology. So organizations are spending a huge amount of money on training people how to manage in the cloud, how to configure the cloud, how to manage cloud services, etc. So we're seeing that shift. There is a growing amount of knowledge about how to manage cloud architectures and cloud technology. The problem is, though, that this training, most of it does not include training on how to use cloud services within your organization. So it's missing that layer of business relationship management, of performance management. It can certainly monitor the performance of the cloud, but it doesn't actually make the link into the performance of the business. So if we're using cloud to support a particular business function, these courses do not actually, or most of these courses do not actually teach us how to make those links. So even though we're growing in our understanding of the technology, we're not investing in the skills that map that technology into the business. I'm not going to cover all of them in the same detail. I think governance and control is a huge one. Again, what this boils down to is it's one thing to be able to manage and control items that you own and that are in your data center. It's completely another thing to manage and control items that are virtual and that are based on assets that you do not own. So this governance model is different. And many organizations are surprised by just how different managing cloud services from managing the kind of technology services that they use from within their organization. We'll cover that in a moment. The others I come back to as we go through the presentation, But just to point out, these are the major issues that organizations are experiencing. This is what is preventing people from achieving the cost, the speed to market, the service quality levels, and so on that were promised by the cloud. So let's have a look at organizations that have used the cloud successfully and what has helped them to do this. And one thing that's in common across all of them is that they have all moved beyond the technical solution. What you'll find is that organizations that use cloud successfully have, yes, they have some good cloud infrastructure, or rather cloud architecture, cloud service management skills. They understand that side of it, they understand the technical side of it. Those that are really successful have moved past the technology side of it and are looking at how cloud services are used and managed in their organization. So let's have a look at what some of those things are. So the first one is making sure that we find the right strategy. And these slides, by the way, are based on a number of different research reports that we've consolidated and come up with findings. It's not an individual research report that has done this. It comes from multiple sources. But here's what we found. We found that an organization has an enterprise strategy. We call that a business strategy or an enterprise strategy. Whatever that is, it's for the whole organization. Within the business strategy, we find that there are two strategies. There's a digital strategy and an IT strategy. Of course, there are many more, but just focusing on those two for the meantime. So the digital strategy focuses on the way in which we use digital technology to support business functions. And that may include traditional IT services as well, but it's all about how we use digital capabilities to support business, grow the business, do new things, do the things we do already, but better. That's what digital strategy is about. IT strategy is more about, okay, what technology do we use and how do we manage it? What we're finding is that these two strategies are growing closer and closer together. Not only that, but that digital strategy is expanding. As businesses become more and more digital, the digital strategy expands to become closer and closer to the business strategy. But the cloud strategy is a little different. The cloud strategy is actually a component of both the digital and the IT strategy. Now, this is really important because many organizations who started out with cloud said, we're going to not think about digital strategy and IT strategy. What we're going to do is we're going to replace those two with the cloud strategy. In other words, the cloud strategy is the digital and IT strategy. Some organizations, you may remember this, use the term cloud first as their strategy. It's like, we don't need a long strategy. We don't even need a 5-page strategy. We just need a 2-word strategy, cloud first. Many of those organizations got into serious trouble. And the reason they got into trouble was because they started moving things into the cloud that shouldn't be there. Things that were really sources of competitive advantage for them. Things that the cloud service provider was not really offering, didn't really have the capabilities to support at the time, but they were being moved into the cloud. And so we found after that first wave of moving to the cloud, we saw a number of services finding their way back into the customer's data center. Very important that a cloud strategy, let me pull the wording up here. Cloud strategies may be strategic for an individual team. For example, you can go to the storage team and say to them, what is your strategy for storage in the organization? And they will say, well, we're going to move as much storage into the cloud as possible. These are the things we cannot move. And that'll be very strategic for that group. However, storage is not a very strategic component of the business. It's something that supports the business, unless you happen to be a storage company. So for most organizations, the cloud discussion is a very tactical discussion. It's okay. We know we need to go in this business direction. We know we need to meet these customers. Now, how are we going to use cloud to help us do that? So it's a supporting strategy. It's tactical. And very often a cloud strategy is about how we modernize our environment, or it's about how we support a particular digital strategy, or it's about digital transformation and how we're going to use cloud as part of that digital transformation. But the strategy is bigger than just the cloud. The other thing to remember is that cloud is strategic for the consumer. In other words, I may say, hey, I'm going to move a lot of things to the cloud. The cloud is a really important part of me being able to provide services. It's a very important part of me being able to operate or do my business operations. It's a very important part of how I track sales and customer relationships. Therefore, the relationship with a cloud service provider is very strategic for me. Well, that's great. But the problem is that you're not very strategic to the cloud service provider. Really? But cloud service providers need us, don't they? Yes, they absolutely do. But that doesn't mean that every individual organization's strategy is what they base their whole service design on. Here's how they base their service design. Cloud is based on the fact that I can take one environment and I can make that environment available in a standardized way to thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of customers. So create one standardized service, maybe give it some tiers, so you get a little bit more the more you pay, but it's all standardized, and you then take that and deliver it to hundreds of thousands of customers. As opposed to when we're doing it in-house or when we're using a single vendor to provide us with a solution, that is very strategic because basically we're not using standardized services. We're creating services that are very specific to our needs. In those cases, you will find that the vendor or the supplier will view you as more strategic. But if you are using a cloud service provider who provides you with access to standardized services, you are one of 1,000 organizations that use those services. That means that you are not as strategic to them as they are to you. Forrester Research a number of years ago coined the phrase, the uneven handshake, which means that the cloud service, you are depending a lot more on the cloud service provider than they are depending on you. What does that mean? It means you have to be very careful about specifying exactly what you need from the cloud before you move to the cloud. Do not expect the cloud service provider to design their whole set of services around the way that you work. They cannot do that because that is not how their business model works. Now, I say they cannot do it. Of course, they could. There are situations where they have, in fact, provided a very specific set of cloud solutions to customers. Those customers are very big, and usually they have a very specific set of requirements. One that springs to mind is the intelligence community in the US government. Yes, we know that certain cloud service providers had to provide a very dedicated and very different set of cloud services to those organizations than they do to the commercial organizations. But those are by far the exception. So find the right strategy, which means don't expect the cloud service provider to tell you what to do. It's very important that you have to define how you're going to use cloud services before you actually go and sign up a cloud service provider. Right. There's another thing that successful organizations do, and that is they design their cloud solutions for how they use the cloud and how they're going to govern services in the cloud. Now, don't be afraid by that word governance. Some people, when they see that word and it's like, oh my goodness. That's a scary word. It involves all kinds of things that are way above my level of control, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, I don't even like to use the word control. Why do I have to think about governance? Well, governance simply means how are you going to manage the cloud services? Who has the authority to make decisions in the cloud? Who can buy cloud services? That's what we mean by governance here. So there are two, as I said, there's two things that we have to design for. The first one is how are you going to use cloud? And what we learned is that there are kind of two ends of the spectrum. On the one hand, we have highly standardized use of the cloud. An example of that would be, for example, storage, right? You're just going to buy storage, it's standard. You get different categories of storage. You choose which category you want, and that's it. You go with storage. On the other hand, there are some organizations that want to use the cloud for emergent, innovative uses. And an example of that was the AI labs that each of the cloud service provider made available to their customers in the cloud. So you could use the cloud to kind of experiment with AI approaches and so on. But again, those approaches were made available to pretty much anybody who was a cloud consumer. So you weren't going to get a uniquely configured, designed, bespoke, emergent technology from the cloud service providers. You would get emerging technology, and you would be allowed to use that in a fairly standardized way. Okay, just want to make sure that Carol, if you need to stop me, please do jump in. Right, the second thing we want to look at is how are we going to manage this cloud environment? So the governance thing. And on the one hand, there are organizations that need to have very centralized control over this. We need to know exactly what is being used by our users, and we want to know exactly what they're using it for. And we're going to manage all access to the cloud from one central point. Right? That's on the one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum, we have teams that say, no, that's too much control. We want to innovate. We want to do something new. We need to be able to use cloud in the way that suits our team best. And so we have these two kind of disparate groups working. And the interesting thing is they're in the same organization. So we have in the one organization, we have a range of cloud services that needs to be strongly controlled and managed from a central point. And on the other hand, we have groups who are saying, well, we need to do our own thing. And off they go, and they go and use the cloud in their own way. How are you going to use cloud? In fact, let's make it even simpler. What we do is, and here's a helpful tip for those of you who are consultants or want to become consultants, whenever you see two spectrum statements like this, continua, all you do is you take one and you move it vertical. And what you then have is 4 quadrants. Magic. So that's what we did here. Said, take the design solutions for use in government. So take the use, take the governance, and put them together. And what do you get? What you get is 4 categories of users that are going to be using cloud services within your organization. And remember that all 4 of these could exist at the same time, but it's important for you to know which groups are using which type of cloud solution. So the first one is pretty much it's standardized services with centralized control. These are great for centralized or for standardized components and for existing solutions. Right? Think of things like office automation, virtual rooms like we're on right now. These are standard. They're centrally controlled. Every user in the organization uses the same one. Right? Then it makes sense. Have them managed by a central team. If there's like-for-like replacement, in other words, if you can switch one solution out for another solution pretty easily, then that's a really good candidate for the first type of management. And then if you're going for modernization, if you're going to take an existing solution and you're going to modernize it using new technology in the cloud, that's a really good approach to look for standardized commodity kind of components using centralized control. Why? Well, because you are replacing existing technology and existing use cases. So they are really pretty standardized, which means you go and look for the like-to-like comparison for what you can find in the cloud. Now, group two is where you have standardized components, but you'll find that every group or every business unit wants to do their own thing. In that case, what you do is you have IT acting as a broker for those standardized offerings. They become the central clearinghouse, the central point of ordering for those components. And it's easy to do that because they're standardized. The product teams can use these, or we can ask or require the product teams to use these standardized components as platforms for them to do the things that they're doing. So they can even use these standardized components in non-standard ways. Group three is where you have centralized control, but you're using something new, something innovative. In other words, it is not a standard component of your business, in which case, what you want is you want an environment that is kind of controlled, because you don't want to start introducing all kinds of technology with no standardization. And before you know it, you have this mess of chaotic cloud use, which is unmanageable. So what we do here is we create very specific scenarios about how this new technology is going to be used and who's going to be using it, and we allow them to go ahead and do their thing, but it's very clearly controlled. If they're going to be experimenting, we need to know what the results of those experiments were and where they're going to move this in future. This can also be used as a way of migrating to new solutions. So if you have suddenly seen the need, for example, I'm meeting, I have an existing market, but instead of meeting the needs of that market on our traditional CRM platform, I want to do it in the cloud, then this is a really good way to go. Centralized control using new technology. We need centralized control for one main reason. That is because we are probably going to have multiple groups, multiple users who are going to be impacted by this decision. And so we want to make sure that we coordinate the use of cloud across all of those groups, so we don't surprise any of them with something that's just been thrown into production or thrown into live use within the organization. Now, right at the end of this is group four. Group four is where you have decentralized use of, decentralized management. In other words, you have a number of different autonomous groups within your organization. They're all self-contained. They all do their own thing. They would do that whether they were using cloud or not. That's the way they're structured. And those groups are going to be using emergent innovative solutions. So examples of these are, for example, product groups who are developing new solutions for the marketplace. That would be a good example of a group like that. Now, very important here, just because they're doing their own thing and they're using emerging technology does not mean we don't want to know about it. We absolutely do want to know about it. We just don't control it or manage it in the same way as we do the other three groups. So again, very important if you're moving to the cloud, if you're using cloud services, understand how it's going to be used and how it's going to be managed, and adjust your management style and your governance model to be able to address all four of these groups at the same time in the same organization. As I say, those organizations who've been successful with cloud have been able to do this. I'm going to talk about the how in a moment. Right. Some of the other things we want to do. Think outside the container. And that's a little bit of a pun for those of you who are in the cloud. Cloud makes a lot of use of containers in the technology. So, but think outside of the actual technology of the cloud. There are a lot of things in your organization that will make cloud successful or unsuccessful. So, for example, we've spoken about governance and control. How are you going to manage these solutions? And I know there's a tendency out there which says we don't like governance, we're going to resist control. Fine. But then you need to have a way of managing the chaos. You need a way of being able to manage and find your way through not only duplicate technologies that are introduced to the organization, but multiple versions of technology that are introduced in the organization. So there needs to be some sort of oversight. There needs to be some sort of standard or some sort of orchestration that is involved in the organization as you move into the cloud. It can be very centralized and very controlling. It can be very decentralized, but it has to be formal. And organizations that say, nah, cloud doesn't need governance are the ones who are going to fail. Security, very important. So again, do not depend on the cloud service provider to tell you, yeah, your cloud services will be secure because we are secure. Your cloud services will be secure provided you use the configuration tools that they provide you, provided you use the monitoring tools that they give you, provided you have access control, provided you have security policies that you can extend into the cloud. Then, service levels. Again, very important. Don't assume that whatever you get from the cloud, you're just going to pass through to whoever's using it. It doesn't work like that. Your average cloud service forms part of something else. So what is that something else? And is there an expectation of service for that something else that is not supported by the cloud service that you're providing? There needs to be that alignment throughout the chain. So what is the level of service that you're expecting at the end of the chain, and how does your cloud service support that? If you cannot understand that, it's going to be very difficult for you to manage the level of service you get from the cloud provider. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why organizations find it so difficult to achieve the improvement in levels of service that they were anticipating. And that is because they did not fully align or fully map all of the components of the service before they moved into the cloud. And now it's in the cloud. It's a little bit late to start thinking about, oh, what level of service do I need? Users are complaining because they're not getting the service, but now I don't own that service anymore. I'm renting it from whoever. How do I adjust it to get the service right? It's a little bit late to do it afterwards. So do it before. Another thing that we need to think about is our procurement and vendor management strategy. Now, I know it's not very fashionable in cloud terms to talk about vendor management and procurement, but the reality is we're spending money with an external party. Whenever you spend money with an external party, there needs to be a way of understanding what value you're getting for that money. And that means being able to understand the link between what level of service we need, how much we're paying for it, and how to adjust that over time and circumstance. So whatever you call it, whether it's procurement and vendor management or service acquisition or whatever it is, that needs to be in place. Don't assume that just because it's easy to pay for cloud services, that you don't need to do the due diligence that you would normally go through with any other external vendor. It's very important. And then finally, and it shouldn't be final, it's actually the most important. Remember that these cloud services exist only because people are needing to use them. Here's the thing though, the minute you start using cloud services, things change. People's behavior change. The way they work changes. The culture of the organization starts to change. So it's very important as you're introducing cloud services to anticipate the changes to your organization. So a lot of organizational change management here. And by that, I don't just mean how do we convince people to use cloud? I also mean understanding how the organization changes when you do, because it's not always something you can easily predict. Sometimes you have to introduce the change and then get feedback and adjust to that feedback in real time. So it's always think about the people. And there we talked about the shift in roles and responsibilities. How do those change? We're also talking about the changes to the operating model in the organization. How do people work differently? Okay. What else do organizations do that have used cloud successfully? Well, one very important thing is that they have aligned cloud to their operating model. Now, most organizations, though, what they do is they see an opportunity to use the cloud and they go for it. It looks cheaper, it looks like it's going to be faster, and immediately it looks like a good win. But what they don't look at is what is the impact of moving something from their data center into the cloud? What parts of your current operating model are you changing? Are you replacing? Are you doing differently? And if we don't understand that, what's going to happen is the organization will start to behave differently, and sometimes in a way that you really don't want. So here we have the cloud technical architecture. That's the way the cloud vendor does it. Here we have our own operating model. Here's what happens if we just go ahead without aligning the two, without understanding how our operating model maps to the things that we're doing in the cloud. So what we have here is a number of failures. The cloud doesn't do what we thought it would do. We have gaps. Well, the cloud doesn't actually do everything that the technology that we had in our data center does. Or if it does do it, we have to pay more. There are overlaps, and there may be deficiencies, things that just do not perform the way that they need to be, etc. So this misalignment between the cloud consumer's operating model and the cloud technical architecture causes a lot of damage. Very important thing to do as you move into the cloud, or even as you realign your organization once you've moved into the cloud, is to map out your operating model and understand what components you've replaced and how that impacts the way the organization works. And then finally, one of the things that organizations do that are very successful with the cloud is they define responsibilities clearly. Now, what you'll see on this chart, and don't worry, I'm not going to go through every one of these, but what you'll see is two different colors. So when something is in-house, in other words, it's sitting in our data center, we're responsible for everything. Oops, didn't mean to do that, sorry. Let's go back. We're responsible for everything. So that orange color, that's what we have to do. When you move to infrastructure as a service, you'll notice that we take out these things at the bottom. Those things are sourced to the cloud service provider. However, there are things that we still have to do, that we're still responsible for. There are the things in the yellow here, but notice one very interesting thing changes here. And this is something that's not well explained in any of the cloud service providers literature. And what it is that in service management, actually you split responsibilities. So in everything else, you'll notice we give responsibility to them for these things, we retain responsibility for those things. But in service management, you start to split responsibilities. Think of change management, for example, or change enablement, as it's now called in ITIL 4. In change enablement, you actually have to have both the cloud service provider and the consumer organization involved in the same change enablement practice. Well, that's a little bit different. It's not just, okay, you do this and we do that. It's actually, there are pieces where we actually have to kind of each take a component of that. Think about incident and problem management, and what incident management responsibilities are split between us and the service provider. What problem management responsibilities come to us and which go to the service provider. They're different. That has to be agreed. And it's something that's very often not agreed. So it's just left to chance. Well, are you an ITIL compliant service provider? Yes, we are. Okay, cool. Yeah, but complying with ITIL in the cloud is very different than complying with ITIL in your data center. They mean something very different. How are you going to manage that? Right. So those are some of the things that that are key for organizations that have been successful in the cloud. The next question is, how does ITIL actually help? So best practice that works for the cloud. I'm going to start from the beginning. So one of the things that ITIL does is it focuses on not just the technology, but it focuses on bringing together the technology with the organizations and people, the information you need, the value streams and processes that are important for your organization to survive and thrive, as well as how we manage partners and suppliers within the organization. And we recognize in ITIL that all four of those dimensions is constantly changing. And it's changing because of all of these things around the outside: political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental factors. So ITIL doesn't just say, hey, do you need a technical solution for your problem? Okay, cool, there it is, cloud service. Take it and you've got it, run with it. No, it says if you're going to adopt a cloud service, first understand who's going to be using it. What is the organization trying to achieve? What information is going to be involved? Can it even be in the cloud? If it is in the cloud, what kind of additional control do you need? What sort of versions of data are you going to need, and where are those versions going to be held? There's a story behind that. I won't go into too much detail, except to say that I knew one organization that decided to have storage in the cloud because it was so cheap. Within 1 year, their storage costs had tripled. Why? Well, the per gigabyte cost was very low. But what was happening is that everybody was dumping all of their data into live real-time retrieval storage options. And they were duplicating it multiple times over just in case they needed it in future. Well, of course, your costs are going to spiral. So what information do you need? When do you need it? Who's using it? What are they using it for? Does it need to be duplicated? Can it be held in real time, or can it be moved into an archive? You don't know the answers to those questions unless we're looking at all of these four dimensions together. So that's the first way in which ITIL can help. It brings all of these different components to bear in that conversation. The next thing that ITIL does to help is it introduces this concept of the service value system. I know many of you are familiar with this, but let me just walk through it for those who are not. So first of all, the service value system is based on this idea that there is an opportunity or demand for something we do on the one side, and on the other side, if we can meet that demand, our customer will achieve value. To make sure that that happens, we have a service value chain, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. But to make sure that the service value chain is working properly, we have governance in place, and we have tangible, executable, understood practices that we use to support that value chain. Around that, we have a set of guiding principles which tell us the policies within which we should be working, things which guide us in the decisions that we have to make. But we also have a spirit of continual improvement. And especially in the cloud, nothing is going to stay the same from one day to the next. How do you move from one state to the next very quickly, continually improving the organization and its success as you do so? So the service value system enables us to determine where is the best place to use cloud services within the stream of opportunity to value or demand to value. What kind of policies help us to make those decisions? What kind of practices help us to not only migrate to cloud, but also to identify new opportunities for cloud services and how we use them? So it's not just a case of, hey, we got a need here, let's go to the cloud and look what's going to fit that need. It's a lot more than that. It's, yes, we need to do that, but also, how is that going to impact our ability as an organization to deliver things that are really valuable to our consumers? Now, within the service value stream, right in the middle there, service value system, I should say, is the service value chain. Now, what this is just a a way of defining how we as service providers do things to use and provide technology services. So again, we're going to start with demand and we end with value. Here are the things we do. We engage with our customers, sometimes with our service providers. In fact, we engage with all stakeholders who are involved in that service. As we engage with them and we're designing a solution, we will design it. We will either obtain or build it. In the case of cloud, we'll probably obtain it. And then we'll deliver and support it once it's been transitioned. Once we have the solution in place, we are then able to provide products and services to our customers and consumers, and again, align it to the service value system through our planning and improvement processes. Now, it's a very abstract kind of model. Let me just walk you through one. So, and of course, there's feedback there as well. Let me walk you through one. So, for example, here is a set of activities that we may follow through the cycle. We start with a demand. Hey, you need this? Great. Let's talk about it. What are your requirements? We've got just the thing. It's a standardized requirement, so we don't have to go through design. We've already got that in place. So let's go and obtain it. We'll deliver it, and we'll then update the service catalog and make sure that everybody knows that this service is available. And then when you use it, you will be able to achieve the value that you were looking for. Great. That flow through the service value chain is what is called a value stream. Now, what we can do, and you'll see that value stream, there we go. There's all kinds of links to that. As we map the value streams, we can then quantify exactly how the cloud service is going to contribute to that value stream, whether it's going to meet the needs of that value stream and all of the stakeholders that are involved in that value stream. And that helps us to make better decisions about the cloud. It also helps us to track whether the cloud is meeting its purpose or not, and if not, what to do about it. There are a bunch of practices that go into this, by the way. I'm not even going to list them all, but all of the practices that are in ITIL have something to do with contributing to how these value streams work. So each of the practices can be applied to how to evaluate, manage, and improve the way in which cloud services are used. One final thing that ITIL does is it actually helps us to go through the cloud consumer journey. Now, here's a very interesting thing. As we were doing research for all of the information that's in ITIL about the cloud, one thing became very clear, and that was that most IT departments struggled with the cloud for one very important reason, was because they were treating the cloud as if they were the service owner, as if they were the service provider. But in fact, when you move to the cloud, the IT department becomes a service consumer. You cannot manage cloud services the same way as you manage devices in your own data center, for one very simple reason: you don't own them. The person who owns them is the cloud service provider. You are a customer of the cloud service provider, which means we have to learn a different way of engaging with the cloud service provider. And to do this, we have actually provided quite a bit of guidance in ITIL about how to move through the cloud consumer journey as customers. I just put this up here as an illustration. I'm not going to go through it in any detail, but this is available in ITIL, and it's available in a book called Acquiring and Managing Cloud Services. In fact, you can see that book referenced right here. So it's right up here, Acquiring and Managing Cloud Services. However, making sense of that book, there's a bunch of information throughout ITIL which provides you with the building blocks that make it possible for you to use and manage cloud services effectively. And I'm not going to go through this in any great detail, except to say the ITIL Foundation, very important because it gives you those basic concepts, understanding what the service value system is, the service value chain, the 4 dimensions of service management, and so on. Different types of relationships, provider and customer relationships. And it then enables you to really apply that in 3 ways. One is as a person doing the day-to-day work of managing these practices and executing these practices. 2, as a manager or director who's overseeing the use of those practices. Or 3, as a senior strategist who is trying to make sense of how the organization applies new and emerging trends in the market and in technology to their organization. These 3 together give you all of the tools that you as an organization need to be able to make good decisions and to use cloud effectively. And now, without any further, I'm going to call an end to this presentation, but I did promise that there was a special offer awaiting you, and that comes up here. So, for those of you starting your ITIL journey, or for those of you wanting to get others in your organization to start the journey so that you can work with them more effectively, Sunset Learning is offering a 20% off the ITIL 4 Foundation course. There is the code to be used, and in fact, Carol has just come on screen. I'm going to hand over to her so she can walk you through this great offer. Thank you, Carol. Over to you.
Thank you, David. Thank you for the session. So we are offering 20% off in our 4 Foundation course. Please note that the code expires on 19 July, and I will leave here the URL for all of our courses. Okay, thank you so much. I hope you all enjoyed the session.
Thank you very much. In case any of you would like to contact me, please do. There are my details. Thank you all for your time, and it has been a pleasure being here today.
If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and click on the notification icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.